Hello and welcome back to Something Z, and welcome to If Deku Got the Omnitrix Part 1, and since there's nothing to say, let's jump into the video in 3, 2, 1. Okay, we begin this what if in a different universe, and a spaceship was under attack by a dictator by the name of Vilgax right next to Earth, and as a last-ditch effort to make sure he doesn't get what's on board, they shoot it out in an escape pod, and before it could reach the planet below, a rift opens up and the pod goes through it, so it doesn't go to the planet. So now we are back in the world of My Hero Academia, and a 10-year-old Izuku was on a camping trip with his mom. And they were sitting around a campfire, but after some time, Izuku and Inko noticed that the fire was going out. So Izuku went to go get sticks around the area, but while he was searching, he noticed what looked like a shooting star. But after a couple of seconds, he noticed that it was falling directly at him. And when he noticed this, he ran out of the way, and a couple of seconds later, it lands a few feet away from him, and it creates a crater. And when the dust settles, Izuku goes to see what it is. And in the crater, there was a pod, and when he got close to the pod, it opened up, revealing a watch. And confused what was happening, Izuku went to grab the watch. And when his arm got close, the watch leaped onto Izuku's arm. And seeing this, Izuku tried to pry it off, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't get it off. And eventually, Izuku hits a button on the watch, and that made the dial extend out. And on the dial, there was a silhouette of a humanoid-looking creature. And Izuku pressed down on it, and when he did, a flash of light appeared, and when it was gone, he looked at his hands. But when he looked down, his hands seemed to be made out of some sort of crystal, and his body was a dark purple. And when he looked at his chest, the symbol that was on the watch is now on his chest. And seeing that he was different, he did the most logical thing, and he panicked. He started to run around, waving his arms. And eventually, after a couple of seconds, an energy beam comes out of his hands, and when it hits a nearby tree, it cuts it down. Izuku then rapid-fire shot energy beams, testing his new apparent powers. But after a couple of minutes, one of the beams hits a tree that was too close, and it falls directly onto the pod. And wanting to make sure the pod was okay, Izuku tried to push the giant log, which to his surprise actually moved. And when it was off the pod, he saw that the pod was crushed into many pieces. And shortly after that, Izuku began to walk back to camp. But on his way back, the symbol on his chest began to flash red, and eventually he turned back to normal, with the watch still on him. But for some reason, it was red. So Izuku, when he makes it back to camp, shows his mom the watch he found. But when he tried to show her what he was talking about, nothing happened. So Izuku believed that there must be some sort of recharge for the watch. So then Izuku goes to show his mom the crash site. And after Izuku showed her the crater and the trees he just cut down, the Omnitrix turned green again. So he told his mom to look at him. Then he slammed his hand on the watch. And when the flash of green light was gone, where Izuku stood, there is now a giant mummy, which at first freaked Inko out. But when she calmed down, she told Izuku that he can be a hero now. Then she tells him that she's sorry that she told him he couldn't be a hero before. And the reason she said this is because all she knows is that the watch is stuck onto Izuku, and that he can't really do anything about it. And it doesn't seem to be hurting him in any way. So if this is a way for him to achieve a dream, then she's okay with it. So the next day, Inko took Izuku to the hospital to go test out his powers. But the two kept it a secret that the watch came from space, and they just said that it grew on Izuku's arm one morning. And after some testing, they found out that Izuku was able to transform into 10 different aliens. So I guess it's time for me to go over them, and I'm assuming that you've already figured this out by now, but Izuku doesn't have the original 10. And you may be wondering, why didn't he have the original? And there's a simple reason. A reason that makes a lot of sense. I just didn't want to do the originals. So instead, I got a list of all 63 aliens, and I chose 10 at random. So the first alien is Snarrow, a mummy-like alien that has the ability to control his bandages. The second one is Upchuck, who has the ability to eat just about anything, then shoots them out in energy balls. The third one is Fast Track, a feline alien that has the ability to run fast. The fourth one is Goop, a slimy alien that is in fact a single-cell organism. The fifth one is Brainstorm, which looks like a giant crab, and this one is Izuku's smartest alien. The sixth one is Buzzshock, a small electric alien that can shoot electricity and control electronics to some extent. The seventh one is Water Hazard, a humanoid alien that can shoot out and manipulate water. The eighth one is Chromastone, the one he first transformed into, and it's a humanoid-looking alien made out of rocks and crystals that has the ability to shoot out energy beams. Izuku's ninth alien is Crasshopper, a bug-looking alien that has strong legs that allows him to jump high into the air. And finally, his 10th alien is Echo Echo, which gives Izuku the ability to duplicate himself and shout at high frequencies. And for convenience sake, they all look like how they originally do. So now let me explain the mechanics of the watch. It allows Izuku to be an alien for about 10 minutes, and right after transformation, the watch is on cooldown for 5 minutes. And the Omnitrix has a failsafe, so if anyone tries to rip off the Omnitrix, then a burst of energy appears that will blast whoever tried to grab it away. And the scientists who did research on Izuku found the same thing happens when the symbol in Goop tries to be removed. so it's believed that if someone could withstand the energy, they can simply rip off the watch. Also, the watch will not always give Izuku the right alien, so Izuku has a 5 out of 12 chance to get the wrong alien. Okay, I'm sorry I talked about the omnitrix for so long. I just wanted to explain it for anyone that doesn't understand the omnitrix, even though if you clicked on this video, you probably know at least a bit about Ben 10. So let's get back into the what if. So after Izuku got tested for his quirk, he got to name it, and since he doesn't actually know the name of the watch, Izuku just called it his watch. And when word got out about Izuku's quirk, he became a bit of a celebrity, since his quirk is nothing like they'd seen before, since it looks like a mutation quirk, but unlike others, he can transform into 10 different aliens. But by this time of the actual story, most people have forgotten about Izuku and his watch, and in this, Izuku was called Deku, but after he got the omnitrix, he and Bakugo became rivals. So now we skip to the start of the series, and by the 6 years, Izuku got 2 more aliens, a pterodactyl-looking alien that has the ability to control green energy from his body, that he named Astrodactyl, and a hybrid between a spider and a monkey, which goes by the original name Spider Monkey. So it's the beginning of the series, and Izuku's teacher asked the class who wanted to be in the hero course, and of course everyone in the class raised their hand. But after seeing this, Bakugo began to rant about how he's the only one worthy of joining UA, and hearing this, the class asked what about Izuku, and hearing this, Bakugo began to shout, saying that he was better than that dozen freak. So now we skip to the end of the school day, and since Bakugo doesn't bully Izuku as much, Izuku just wrote down his hero notes on Mount Lady and he began to walk home. But this time he decided to take a shortcut, and he eventually makes it to a bridge. But while he was under the bridge, he saw nearby a sewer grate begin to shake. And saying this, Izuku activated the omnitrix, and after a couple of seconds, a villain made out of sludge came out of it, and seeing Izuku, he lunged at him, and he began to force his way into Izuku's body. And while he was slowly suffocating, Izuku goes for the omnitrix, and he slammed on the first alien, since he couldn't focus that much. And when the flash of light was gone, Izuku was buzzshot. Then Izuku began to surround himself with electricity, and in the process, he shocked the sludge villain, and Izuku was using all of his electricity to shock him. And right before he was about to run out, he heard a voice come from the sewer, which was, "Have no fear, 'cause I am." Then All Might jumped out of the sewer, and when he saw Izuku shocking the sludge villain, he told him to stop. So hearing this, Izuku used the last of his electricity to fly over to All Might. Then All Might ran up to the villain, and he punched the sludge villain as hard as he could, making the villain get knocked out. And while the villain was knocked out, All Might put him into 2 soda bottles. And when All Might was done, the omnitrix timed out. So Izuku got turned back to normal, and seeing Izuku revert, he tells Izuku he has an interesting quirk, but he tells him that he shouldn't be using his quirk in public since he doesn't have a license. Izuku then nods, and shortly after All Might signs Izuku's notebook, All Might jumps away. Then Izuku goes home. So now we skip to the UA entrance exams. And during the time between meeting All Might and the entrance exams, Izuku did training, so he's just a little weaker than he was in the canon. And when Izuku began to walk into UA, he tripped on a rock. But before he hit the ground, he stops midair, and seeing this, Izuku began to look around, and when he looks at his bag, he sees the girl holding on to it, and after putting him back on the ground, she gave him weight again, and after a bit of talking, she leaves and goes into the exam hall, and shortly after that, Izuku went to the exam hall as well, and when the exam hall got filled, President Mike told all the examinees the events that will take place, and the rules for each event, so we skip an hour or two, and Izuku finished taking the written part of the exams, and he and everyone else that passed the written exams are currently standing outside the exam area for the next test. So eventually Mike, standing on a large tower, starts to count down for the test to begin, and when he hits 0, Izuku went for fast track to get as many points as possible. A flash of green light appeared, and when it was gone, Izuku was fast tracked, then he sped through the gate and he was able to get ahead of everyone else, and when he timed out he had 35 points, and when the omnitrix had power again, he went for upchuck. And when the flash of light was gone, he was upchuck. He then swallowed any nearby robots, and he used what he consumed to shoot out energy balls. And by the end of the 10 minutes, Izuku had 55 points. And when Izuku got the omnitrix recharged, he wanted to go for fast track again, so he could get as many points as he could with the remaining time. But before he could slam his hand down, Izuku and the rest of the examinees saw the 0-pointer get released. And Izuku was going to run with the rest of the examinees. But when he heard someone yell from pain, he looked back, and he saw the girl that saved him earlier from falling, and she was trapped under some rubble. So Izuku ran to her and he chose Snarrow, and when the flash of light was gone, he was Snarrow. So Izuku stretched out his arms under the rubble and he wrapped his arms around them, and when they were secured in his arms, he threw the rubble off of her. Izuku then asked if she was okay, and she told him that she was mostly okay, but the lady that was trapped under the rubble was in a lot of pain. So Izuku then grabbed her and carried her away, and after a couple of minutes, they hear alarms throughout the entire city, and they get told that the exams are now finished, and after a thank you from the girl, she leaves, and shortly after that, Izuku left as well. So now we skip a couple of days and Izuku got his results by letter, and with the help of both his robot points and his rescue points, he was able to pass the test and get into UA. So now we skip to when Izuku got to the front door of the class 1A, and when he opened the door, the first people he saw was a man with glasses and Bakugo yelling at each other about Bakugo having his legs on his desk. And after saying that, Izuku went to an empty desk, and a couple of minutes later, someone walks up to him. It was the girl that he helped during the exams, and after they gave each other their names, they started talking, and after a couple of minutes, they noticed a sleeping bag in the doorway, and when the class noticed this, they shut up. Then a man started to climb out of it, and when he was fully out of it, he said that he was their teacher. Then he tells them to get dressed in their PE clothes and to meet him outside. So now we skip to when everyone was at the field, and when Aizawa was sure everyone was there, he gave Bakugo a ball. Then he told Bakugo to throw it as hard as he could using his quirk, and when Bakugo threw it, he used an to launch the ball farther, and when the ball hits the ground, a number appears on Aizawa's phone, and he shows it to the class, with the number being 705.2 meters. Then he told everyone that they will be seeing how practical their quirks are, and at the end he tells them whoever gets in last place will be expelled, since he doesn't have time to teach people who don't have potential, and for this I'll allow Izuku to transform for every test. So for the 50-mile dash, Izuku transformed into fast track, and when he ran he got 2 seconds, and for the grip strength he turned into goop, which allowed him to get one of the top scores, and for the long jump Izuku transformed into Crash Hopper, and with his strong legs he was able to clear the sandbox. So now it's time for the ball throw, and Izuku goes for Spider Monkey, and when the flash of light was gone, instead he was Brainstorm. So Izuku, trying to make the most of this, picked up the ball using his telekinesis and he threw the ball as far as he could, but Izuku wasn't actually able to throw it that far. But even with his bad Izuku got placed in the middle since he got a good score throughout the entire test, while in last place there was Mineta, who after the results were shown was taken to the principal's office, and the class never saw him after that. So now we skip to the next day, and when it was time for the hero course, instead of Aizawa walking into the room, it was All Might instead, in his Golden Age outfit, and after the class freaked out that All Might was in their classroom, he told them to put on their hero costumes, and to meet him on ground B. So it's time for me to explain Izuku's hero costume. Since Izuku can rely on the omnitrix, he wanted his costume to be basic. So it's a black and white jumpsuit with gloves and a utility belt that has things you can use in order to buy time, such as smoke bombs. And his arm sleeves are not all the way since Izuku needs room for the omnitrix, and he wanted it to be symmetrical. And Izuku still has his mask, since just in case his omnitrix is timed out, he doesn't want to fall victim to different gases. So now we skip to when All Might sees everyone in their hero costumes, and he tells them they will be doing a heroes versus villains exercise. He then explains the rules, and at the end of the explanation, he tells them that they will have a time limit of 30 minutes. And when he's done, he puts everyone into groups of 2, with Izuku being paired with Ochako. He then pulled 2 team letters out of 2 boxes, and he got Izuku and Ochako's team for the heroes, and Bakugo and Iida's team for the villains. And when the matchup was revealed, the rest of the class goes to a room to watch the match. And while the class was walking into the room, the 4 go to the exercise building. And before the match, Izuku and Ochako were coming up with a plan, and while they were coming up with a plan, Iida asked Bakugo how many creatures could Izuku transform into, and after Bakugo briefly explains all 12 of Izuku's aliens, Iida asks how are they able to stop someone who can practically do anything, and in response, Bakugo tells Iida that they will attack him while he's human. So after a couple of minutes, the exercise began, and when Izuku got into the building, he and Ochako ran until they eventually come across 2 different hallways. So Izuku went for Echo Echo, and when the flash of light was gone, Izuku was Echo Echo. So Izuku split into 2, so now there's 2 Izukus, and each Izuku took 1 hallway, and they began to scream, and they used the frequencies to find the bomb, doing their own form of echolocation, and eventually he didn't find the bomb, but one of them did find Bakugo, who had his hands over his ears. So Izuku then stopped, and the 2 Izukus combined. Then the 2 students began to run in the direction that Izuku found Bakugo, and eventually the 2 were going to turn a corner, but before they got too close, Bakugo jumped out from the corner, and unlike the cannon, Izuku was expecting this, so he screamed at Bakugo, which when he heard this, Bakugo's ears began to ring and bleed a bit, but Bakugo was able to control himself enough, so Bakugo was able to swipe an explosion at Izuku, but Izuku was able to dodge just in time. Then Izuku created 10 duplicates of himself, and 9 of them charged at Bakugo, while the last one stood by Ochako to make sure she doesn't get hurt in the crossfire. And when the 9 were close enough, they tried to attack him all at once, but Bakugo was able to overpower them easily, and he was able to destroy them using his quirk. Then he began to charge at Izuku, and Izuku in response jumped at Bakugo, and while he was in the air he made more clones, and they told Ochako to close her ears. Then they all shouted as loud as they could, making a wall of sound, which made Bakugo Bakugo's ears ring and bleed more. But before it could do any more damage, Bakugo put his hands to the ground, and he launched an explosion which created a cloud of smoke, and using that, Bakugo ran off to pull himself back together. And seeing that he left, the two began to walk towards the bomb. But a minute after the confrontation, the Omnitrix timed out, turning Izuku back to normal. But even though he was weakened, Izuku and Ochako continued on, and eventually after a couple of minutes the two were able to find Ida. And seeing that the Omnitrix was red, Ida ran at Izuku and he carried Izuku out of the room to the end of the hallway. And seeing that she was alone, Ochako ran to the bomb, but before she could touch it, Ida ran back into the room and closed the door. Then he picked up the bomb and he carried it to the other side of the room. So the two go back and forth, with Ochako trying to get the bomb and Ida moving the bomb away from her. And while this was going on, Izuku was at the door trying to open it, but after a couple of minutes, Bakugo appeared at the end of the hallway, and when he sees Izuku, he rushes at him. And seeing Bakugo charge at him, Izuku threw down a smoke bomb, and Izuku tries to buy time by hiding in the smoke, since he has about a minute before the Omnitrix is usable again. But before the minute was up, Bakugo was able to find Izuku, and he held him up by the collar, and he told Izuku that he was done for. Then he used his quirk directly on Izuku's chest, and he launched him a couple of feet, and when the explosion got fired, it created a cloud of smoke. But in that cloud of smoke, Bakugo saw a flash of green light, and what happened was, in that smoke, Izuku saw that the Omnitrix was powered up, so he slammed on the first alien without even looking at what it was. And when the flash of green was gone, Izuku shot out a web at Bakugo's chest, and before he could react, Izuku grabbed the web he just shot, and he began to spin around, which means Bakugo is being swung around the hallway. And when the smoke finally clears, Bakugo sees Izuku as Spider Monkey, but before he could do anything, Izuku let go of the webbing, and Bakugo got launched to the end of the hallway. Then Izuku ran to the door, and he was about to punch it, but before he could, Bakugo grabbed him, and he fired explosion after explosion trying to hit Izuku, which Izuku was able to dodge most of them, but the last hit was able to get him, and it knocked him to the ground. And when Izuku got knocked to the ground, Bakugo put his hand on Izuku's face, pinning him to the ground. And in response, Izuku moves his tail towards Bakugo's face, and before he could react, he shoots out a web at Bakugo's eyes, blinding him. Then Izuku kicked Bakugo off of him. Then Izuku ran to the door, then he punched it again and again, trying to open it. And after the third punch, the door flew open. Then Izuku leaped at Ida. Then he began to barrage Ida with a bunch of punches, and he was able to distract him enough so he forgot about Ochako. And using this to her advantage, Ochako was able to run to the bomb and get it, and touch it. And when she did, All Might declares on the speakers that the hero team won. And when Izuku heard this, he stopped attacking Ida, and he ripped the web off of Bakugo's eyes. Then the two teams walked to where the rest of the class was. And that's where I'm going to leave the what if. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoy the series moving forward. And I hope to see you next time on Something Z.